This is a reading from the book of Vox Mortem, Tale 1, The Man and the Cuckoo. I've watched men die for many reasons, some for love, some for country, and some for nothing at all. But now and then I come across someone who dies for something far stranger. Silvano Moretti was such a man, a quiet one, a maker of delicate things, but when loss came for him, it didn't knock. It hollowed him out from the inside out. What followed, well, I won't ruin the surprise. You might think this is a tale of madness, but madness is too neat of a word. This, what you're about to hear, is something far more tangled. So sit back and listen closely. You wouldn't have noticed him had you passed his clock shop on a narrow cobbled street in Volterra. A small door, a dusty window, a carved wooden sign that read Watchmaker Moretti, and nothing more. But inside, behind the sleepy storefront, something terrible was winding up. The heart of a man, you see, is no different from a clock. It ticks and ticks to a lazy rhythm day in and day out, until it doesn't. And some hearts tick wrong. Silvano had always been a cherished man, known throughout the city and loved by all, until his beloved mother Maria died in the spring, which tore him apart, which I feel terrible for doing, but it had to be done. It was his mother who'd gotten him into clocks. When Silvano was a little boy, he'd always run around the shop after hours, setting off all the clocks, creating a clattering symphony of chimes that rushed through the entire shop like a headache. Then Maria would get Silvano to fix them all. At first, she thought it was just a child being a child, but soon she figured out that he was doing it on purpose. He loved to tinker inside the clock and hear the chimes ring in his ears. But there was one clock that Silvano never was allowed to touch, God forbid even look at. And little did Maria know that it was her prized possession, her need to keep it a secret and never explain why, that would become the ultimate unraveling of her son. Soon after her death, when the pain of loss eased and Silvano no longer felt the lingering presence of her ghost protecting the clock, telling him not to touch it, another voice grew inside him, one foreign to him, and he finally grew the nerve to remove its veil and see this clock for himself. That was the moment when I met Silvano. As the white sheet settled on the floor, I was there with him, standing behind him as he stood in front of me, motionless, transfixed by the clock. But like with most of my kills, I didn't let him see me. Letting someone see me is never a good thing, for them or for me. Because contrary to what people may say, I don't like suffering, and to see me before your time feels like a sickness you never want to feel. So instead I leapt up, perching myself like a bird onto the rafters of his workshop. He'll never know that I'm here, and what Silvano won't also know is that by touching the cuckoo, he'll break time, and time, being what it is, will break him right back. And that's where we begin our tale. Volterra, Italy, 1853. The morning sun slanted across the narrow square as Silvano unlocked the door to Watchmaker Moretti. A mellow brass tone jingled above him as he pulled open the shutters, lit the lamps, and swept the front step before turning the shop sign to open. Sometimes this routine, even after months, still felt foreign and wrong to him. His mother, oh, his dear, sweet mother, had always been the one for 67 years to do this. Inside, he felt that she should still be doing it, that someday soon she'll come waltzing back into the shop, smelling of lavender and cocoa, humming callous, and take over where she left off. But of course she wouldn't, because now she lay in a coffin after being pieced back together from a fall that split her bones into so many pieces. It was an image that Silvano could never erase from his mind, and the blood was still there, dulled and brown, on the front step of the shop. Silvano had tried to scrub the spot for days, but the imprint of her death was there to stay, forever haunting him of the day he let his mother die. 4 o'clock. Silvano prepped the register, dropping the coins into the correct spaces, and let the shop swallow him. It was the only thing he found that kept his mind at bay. The shop itself, as most clock shops, was a shrine to time. Gilt mantel clocks lined the shelves from floor to ceiling. Grandfather clocks towered in corners, ticking in solemn rhythm. Then there were the wall clocks, desk clocks, and skeleton clocks with glass bellies revealing their metal interiors. Each beat out its own tiny heartbeat, and in the darkness, this was Silvano's light. Like all mornings, they were slow, with customers never arriving till after their espresso had long settled in their bellies. So Silvano took himself past the velvet curtain draped behind the desk and headed back into the workshop where his tinkering hands created their masterpieces. His workshop was nothing to write home about. There was 3 metal tables, all littered with gears and clogs, silver and gold hands, arms, clock faces which he'd freshly gessoed the night before, and planks of wood all cut to different sizes. And then in its own alcove, like an altar, stood his mother's uncovered cuckoo clock. The clock itself was taller than man, carved from jet black walnut, and had a mountain chalet in miniature, surrounded by tiny figures of hunters, goats, and dancers just below the cracked door that led to the hollowed-out home of the cuckoo bird. The bird inside the cuckoo hadn't chirped since the day before his mother died. It remained half lodged in the dark, slightly propping open the miniature door. Its carved wings were slightly open, beak half parted like it had frozen mid-report. Every day he heard the cuckoo chime on the hour, muffled beneath its dust sheet it lived under till it didn't. On that day, the one before his mother left him, as customers came and went, Silvano could hear her swearing in the back room, trying to fix the internal mechanisms which had brought the little bird to life. It frustrated him greatly that she wouldn't let him touch it. She hadn't even let him near it or see the damn thing. It was just a clock, for Christ's sake, and he knew he could fix it. He'd repaired dozens like it before, but his mother had been stubborn. Silvano knew that. She had always been. But the difference now was that she wasn't here to stop him from doing what he was always meant to do. And that's what he's been doing. Since he grew the nerve to uncover the clock, he'd been tinkering with it, reshaping gears, replacing springs, polishing its brass bones. He'd repaired every fault the clock had, except the one that mattered most, the bird. Slowly, Silvano neared the clock now, staring at the tiny little blue bird stuck peeking through the door, as his fingers wound the clock manually with the gold crank. The chains clinked with metallic fatigue, and suddenly his heart beat a little faster at the thought of the bird finally soaring to life, and singing once more to bring her back to him. Silvano waited, but as the moments passed and silence pressed in, his heart dropped. "Sing," he whispered, giving the side of the clock a little slap. Not too hard, though, just enough to wake it and remind it that it had once had life. When it didn't work, he tried an old trick. He set the pendulum swinging, his fingers adjusting the hands to 9:47 a.m., his mother's favorite time, he remembered, and cranked the mechanism again. This time there was a faint tick, a slow whirl, but the bird didn't move. On the other side of the velvet curtain, a bell chimed. Someone had entered the shop. Silvano exhaled sharply, jaw clenched, and turned from the clock. Just as he reached the velvet curtain, what he heard shook him. "You're late." Silvano froze. The room was still and silent apart from the slow tick of the clock. He turned back slowly to see that the bird hadn't moved, but the air around it felt different, almost charged, as if a thunderstorm had passed just above his head. "You're tired," he told himself. "You didn't sleep." And the truth was that he hadn't. For the past 2 weeks, Silvano had been plagued by the same dream, one of gears, of cold, steel, sticky and warm flesh, of hollow places behind ribs where teeth turned like cogs, and inside his mind ticked and ticked, growing louder and louder until he couldn't take it any longer and woke up screaming. But that wasn't important. By midday, the shop was busy. Locals drifted in with their time-worn relics, small repairs, windings, consolations. A woman arrived with a broken watch, a gift from her late husband. Silvano accepted it with a quiet nod and callous hands, putting on his practiced polite smile he had forced every day since Maria had passed. Another man asked for help with a wall clock that had fallen out of rhythm. Silvano adjusted the escapement, recalibrated the chime, and sent the man on his way. But beneath the pleasantries, something else was ticking behind his eyes. Ever since his encounter with the clock that morning, Silvano had felt like there was something haunting him, a haunting that crawled within the usual rhythm of the shop, threading itself through the tick-tocks of the clock, creeping in from beneath the velvet curtain, with a metallic tang that Silvano could feel slithering up his spine and breathed against the back of his neck, and burrowing inside his ear. "You're late. Hell." By afternoon, it had grown louder, almost rhythmic. It pulsed beneath the clatter and chime of his workbench, a subtle undertone he couldn't shake. Tick, tick, tick. "You're late. Tick, tick. Hell. Help." Silvano still clung onto the idea that it was his sleep deprivation meddling with him and the ordinary echo of time bouncing off glass cases and brass gears. He knew that the words didn't belong to any customer nor any clock. They were buried deep in the mechanisms tucked inside the tempo of the room, as if time itself was trying to form language out of sound, and as much as Silvano didn't want to acknowledge it, he couldn't help noticing how much the voice reminded him of her. The tone, the cadence, familiar in a way that made him still for just a moment too long. It made him uneasy, almost sick. Silvano tried to smile through it. He nodded at the right times, handed over the right change, adjusted the right springs, and let muscle memory guide his hands. But as the day grew old, the miasma of taking in his head grew so loud that Silvano wondered if this was what it felt like to lose your mind. If this is how his father felt when... No. He tried to ignore it, but no matter how much he tried to do it, the words just kept coming, threaded between the ticks and talks like static in a radio signal. Time, waiting, come home. That night, instead of going home to eat and trying to sleep, he sat in front of the cuckoo clock, hands stained with oil and a shirt stained with tears. The whispering had stopped. His mother was nowhere to be found, and for the first time since her death, he felt even a deeper wound. Once again, he was given a chance to speak to his mother, and once again, she was ripped away from him. Silvano wiped the drying tears from his glassy eyes, dropping onto his knees in front of the clock. He held onto its sides, pressing warm cheeks against cold glass. "Talk to me," he said through shaky breath, but nothing. "Just talk to me, please." This time he howled as more tears slid down the glass. Again, there was nothing, and the silence inside Silvano's mind never felt so quiet. The entire shop felt like it was frozen in time. No clocks ticked. The outside hum of life stilled, and even his heart felt like it had stopped. "You spoke to me before. Why won't you just speak to me?" When the silence met him again, it didn't hurt this time. The sadness had suddenly rotted into anger. It crawled up slow, thick as bile, until all he could feel was the rage crawling behind his ribs. The silence mocked him now, and he hated it. Hated the bird, hated the hope. Silvano stood, hands shaking, breath racing, seeing red, and with a heavy foot he kicked the clock with all of his might. Its body squealed as it tumbled to the floor. The wet glass, foggy with his tears, shattered into 100 tiny crystal shards that reflected back a version of him he had never seen before. Realizing now what he had done, his heart dropped even lower. Silvano fell to his knees again and began picking up the shards. They cut his hands, ripping into his fingers, slicing the meat of his palms, but all Silvano felt was the numbness petering its way out of his heart. He threw the bloody shards into the belly of the clock and began fishing out the tiny figures that lodged themselves into the depths of the clock. He felt the bile surfacing as his face was cheek to cheek with the cuckoo door which had closed itself when the clock had taken its fall. Uneasy, he tried to paw out the tiny wooden figures, but soon Silvano realized they were helpless for rescue as they were now drowning in a sea of his blood slipping out of his fingers. Then, as one fixed itself in the crook of his nail and finger, the shock in his ear sent him reeling. "You were supposed to fix me." Silvano screamed, heart racing in his throat, trying to push himself away from the clock, but his arm was stuck inside, as if the clock had snared him in his belly. The bird was out of its home, perched between his eyes and staring at him. Its hollow, carved eyes, crude and wooden, were wide and wet. A part of its wing had snapped off, and its beak had completely severed from its face. "You were supposed to help me, Bambino," his mother's voice hissed raw from the bird. Silvano panicked. He tugged and twisted his arm, trying to break free, but the clock wouldn't let go. He could feel the mechanism inside pulsing with a sick sort of life, something pulling and taking, as if the clock had grown teeth. "It's because of you I'm in here. Because of you." Silvano's lips parted, but no sound came out, just the loud pulsing of his heart in his ears. "It's hell, Bambino," the bird echoed. "Because of you." "What are you talking about?" Silvano finally choked out. You left me to die, alone, forgotten. I called for you, and you weren't there." The bird's head tilted towards the shattered face of the clock. "So it took me when you didn't." Silvano felt himself trembling, the weight of exhaustion and grief crashing over him in waves. He had blamed himself for it all, for not being fast enough, for not seeing the signs, for not saving her. I didn't know. I tried, but you failed. The voice cracked now, softer, crueler. And now I'm in here. This is what your love did, Silvano. You broke me, and you left me behind. He closed his eyes, the tears coming fast. Inside the clock, he could feel the gears nipping at his fingertips, trying to pull his fingers into their teeth. Please, I just want to see you again. You can, she whispered. You can. All you have to do is come inside, the way you should have that day. Come and find me. The ticking returned, but this time it wasn't the rhythmic beat he was used to. It was heartbeat fast, pounding, and unnatural. Suddenly the bird leaned in closer, its severed beak touching his nose. Fix me, Bambino. Bring me back. Silvano's vision burst with tears as the gears clamped down on his fingers, the cold iron teeth grinding into his flesh. There was a sharp crack as the first knuckle snapped, and then another, and another. His bones splintered like dry twigs, turning into pulp beneath the relentless bite of the mechanism. He screamed, begging it to stop, but the gears kept going. They chewed, slowly grinding tendon into stringy ribbons and mashing the meat of his hand into something wet and unrecognizable. The pain surged past agony into something near electric, his nerves alight, firing wildly as cartilage popped and ligaments were unspooled like thread. I'll do it. He was hyperventilating now, gulping for air. I'll come. I'll bring you back. I promise. And with that, the grip on his arm released. With a sudden wet pop, his hand slipped free from the clock's belly. Silvano fell back onto the floor, gasping, cradling his hand, and then froze when he saw it. The skin was flayed open, raw and red. The muscle beneath was visible in thick, trembling patches. Splinters jutted from the meat of his palm. His fingers looked chewed. It wasn't a hand anymore. It was ruin. His vision began to swim. The ticking of all the clocks roared in his ears, louder than his pulse. And then, all at once, everything tipped sideways. Silvano collapsed to the floor in a heap of blood as the cuckoo clock watched silently as he slipped beneath the surface of consciousness. Silvano awoke the next morning, still sprawled across the floor, his body stiff and cold. His head throbbed, and for a moment he couldn't move, only blink against the pale, sharp light filtering in through the dusty shop windows. When he finally tried to sit up, he found his clothes clinging to the floor, glued down by the blood that had dried thick and dark beneath him, sealing him to the boards like a dead insect. He winced as he pulled free, breath shallow, and looked down. His hand was wrapped in tight makeshift bandages made of strips of linen stained red and seeped through the edges. He remembered then, the night before, the pain, the grinding, the clock, the bird, his mother. A tremor passed through him, causing him to go pale. How hadn't he bled out? How hadn't he died? Regardless of his mysterious survival, one thing was for sure, that something inside of him had shifted. He stared at the bandage, tempted, almost aching, to peel it back, to look at the damage the clock had done, but he didn't. He was afraid of what he'd see, or what he wouldn't. Instead, he listened. The shop was quiet now, unnaturally so. The clocks had stilled, even the dust hung in the air like it was holding its breath. And in that hush, he heard it faint and barely there, her voice calling him again. But not in anger this time, but in something softer and familiar. It was nice, he realized, to hear her again. After all this time, it was almost like she had never left. He would do anything to hear her again. Anything, and deep down he knew what he had to do. He had to get back inside the clock. She was waiting for him. The days passed, or rather, they ticked. Silvano moved through them like a man in a dream. He wasn't eating much, and he was sleeping less than he was before, but he still opened the shop each morning as though nothing had changed. He greeted customers with his usual quiet nod, accepted broken watches and stopped clocks with steady hands, offered the same soft mechanic smile. And when they asked about his hand, it became known as the kitchen accident. But what they didn't know was that the ticking rod inside Silvano was spreading. It followed him through every repair, every winding spring, every delicate calibration, and layered beneath it was the soft, soothing, blissful tone of his mother's voice. She hummed her favorite melodies to him as he worked, whispered fond memories of his childhood, urged him gently when a gear wouldn't fit, and laughed while he bled a little too much on the workbench. The sound of her voice had become a kind of comfort that felt warm and close. hours, like a lullaby just beyond the veil. He lived for it. At the end of each day, when the shop emptied and the shutters wrapped the shop in darkness, Silvano didn't leave to go home. Instead, he stayed and sat at his drafting desk, hunched in silence, and drew what the melodies of his mother's song spun into his head during the day. All the while, the cuckoo watched over him, still wrecked from its post. By the end of the week, there were hundreds of drawings, crude sketches of his own hands, flayed open and reconstructed with gears and winding keys. Diagrams of his chest split cleanly down the middle to reveal coiled springs, flywheels, and weighted pendulums. Renderings of his skull hollowed out and filled with a complex chime system. But there was one sketch, one he kept folded and pressed close to his heart, was labeled Componente Principal. In it, his mouth hung open with a brass bell nestled deep inside his throat. On this evening, the shop smelled of cedar and warm brass. The sunlight sliced through the display window, dusting everything in gold. Silvano stood there, rearranging the shelves when a chime rang from behind him. Silvano, Signorina Bruni sang as she stepped in, arms wrapped around a gold mantel clock. I thought I might catch you before you close. He turned from the shelves, wiping his hands on a cloth already dark with oil. Hello, he said, with a tired but courteous smile. Still ticking? She smiled politely. Barely. The hands stick at 2:15. He took the clock, examining it. Wrong gears. I'll look at it tonight. For a moment, Signora Bruni lingered. Her eyes darted across Silvano's face that was drawn and pale and smudged with soot in the hollows of his cheeks that covered his smile that didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. Have you been sleeping? She asked carefully, not wanting to overstep her boundaries. She was already known as the neighborhood busybody and didn't want to live up to it. Enough, he said, tinkering with the clock face. It's just that I passed by the other night, she added. It was late and I heard talking. Silvano didn't look up. I assumed you had company, but the shop was dark. He paused, then looked up, giving her that same polite smile. I talk to myself when I work sometimes. It's just an old habit. She hesitated, watching him. I hope you're not alone too much. You've always kept to yourself, but now since... It's just I worry about you, Silvano. You look... Don't, he said, huffed. It's fine, Signora. Truly. She didn't believe him, and as she left, she looked back once more. Silvano had already returned to his work, carefully opening the back of her clock. That night, the shop was still. Outside, the streets of the town lay hushed under fog. But inside, the ticking was louder than ever, growing thick as smoke in the corners of Silvano's mind. For days now, his mother's voice had grown silent. Her soft, warming murmur he heard tucked inside each chime was gone. But the silence wasn't quiet. It screamed, scraped, and hollowed. It felt as though something had reached inside his chest and taken his heart with it, leaving behind nothing but empty gears spinning in vain. He didn't understand why this was happening because he knew he'd done everything right. He made the sketches, oiled the bird's tiny springs daily, wound the chain. What else did it want? What more could he give? Silvano sat hunched before the cuckoo clock, elbows balanced on his knees and fingers laced in a prayer so tight his knuckles had gone white. It had been hours since the cuckoo had chimed. Still, he didn't dare move. He just sat there, watching the clock's silent face, eyes locked on the motionless pendulum, waiting for something. Anything. A sound, a sign, a twitch behind the little door. But the clock stayed still, so he prayed, but not to God. He hadn't done that in years, but to it. To the gears, the springs, the silence, to the shadow of his mother's voice, the one he knew was there echoing somewhere deep within the hollow wood of the clock, because prayer was all he had left. And just as his tears began to stream down his face, the voice came. Bambino? Silvano straightened as if a wire had snapped his spine straight. Mama? The clock didn't move, but the voice filtered through the gears, warm and low. It's been so long, amor mio. You've grown tired, and you've become so thin. It's because I miss you, Silvano said, barely a breath. Every day I would give anything just to talk to you again. But you are talking to me, she cooed. His lips trembled. He reached forward and rested his fingers on the edge of the clock's frame. I knew it. I knew even in your silence that you were still in there somewhere. I've been waiting, she whispered. You left me, Silvano. You let me go, disregarded my wishes. But I forgive you, my sweet boy. He began to sob, clutching the sides of the clock. I didn't mean to. I tried. You were all I had. I couldn't. I didn't know what else. Shh, she cooed. I know, but I'm still here. All I need, Bambino, is your help. Silvano blinked away the tears. That's what I've been trying to do, Mama, this whole time. Just tell me what more I need to do, Mama, and I'll do it. I'll do anything you need me to do. Anything? The voice suddenly sharpened, the softness was gone, and a guttural rasp bled into the gears grinding beneath the vowels. You mean anything, do you? Even after all your pathetic failures? Silvano froze. What? Oh, come on now, the voice said. You couldn't save your own mother. What makes you think you could save her now? His face drained. No, he whispered. Don't say that. The cuckoo door creaked open slowly. The bird emerged, eyes gleaming, wings still cracked. You let her die on the front stairs. You let her bones snap in half, and you let her bleed to death, screaming in agony as everyone watched her. All the while you were fiddling with a clock, and now you come crawling to a wooden box for forgiveness. Silvano's hands trembled, knuckles white. You're not her, he whispered. The bird clicked its ruined beak. No, I'm not, but I sound just like her, don't I? Sweet little Silvano, desperate for a lullaby from Mamma Maria. Oh, poor little clockmaker couldn't fix what mattered. He staggered back. You took her from me. You stole her voice. The bird laughed, wet and warped in the same beloved voice. She's mine now. What will you ever do about it? Silvano screamed. He lunged forward, wrapping his fingers around the bird, hot and pulsing, and yanked. I want her back, he howled. Give her back to me. The bird resisted, but not with force, but with something worse. Will, the kind of resistance that only flesh has, the feeling of something alive refusing to let go. And then, with a sound like a snapping tendon, it came free. Dark sludge burst out of the socket, splashing across his chest. The bird dropped to the floor, a ruin of wood and gore. It twitched, gasping for air, then it cried. Why would you do this to me? It sobbed in his mother's voice. You hurt me again. Silvano fell to his knees, cradling the mangled bird, shivering. I didn't mean to. I thought you killed me, it whispered. Twice. His breath caught in his throat, and something inside of him cracked, fully this time, like the splitting of a mainspring. Silvano sprang to his feet, placing the shivering bird onto the work table as he assembled all the sketches. I know what I have to do now, he whispered down to the bird. I just need the casing, the right gears, and then you'll come back to me. I'll bring you back, Mama. The next morning, Silvano flipped the shop sign to close for repairs, bolted the door, and drew the curtains tight, sealing himself inside. From the street, passers-by assumed he meant the shop was being repaired, but that wasn't it. Silvano wasn't repairing the clocks, he was repairing himself, or at least trying to. From the workshop cupboard, he retrieved the surgical kit his mother had left there in case of emergencies. He lit the oil lamp. The flame wavered across the work table as he stripped off his shirt. Silvano then picked up the smallest blade from the kit, a delicate scalpel sharp enough to part a single strand of hair, angled the mirror to his pale, hollowed-out mug, and placed it beneath his right cheekbone. And without even a breath to steady his nerves, he cut. The sound was wet and grisly, slicing inside his skull. The skin tore slower than he expected, resisting like the rind of old fruit. His blood spilled, thick and arterial, running down his neck and chest in rivulets pooling between his feet. He paused to steady his hand, then carved upwards, splitting his cheek towards the corner of his mouth, widening it into a grotesque approximation of a grin, a mimicry of the bird's beak. But as he swallowed the pain blooming in his chest, he went too deep, and the blade slipped, striking a nerve. A shock ran through Silvano's jaw like lightning. He dropped the blade and screamed in an agony that would even frighten a banshee. When he came to, the floor was swimming in blood. It soaked with sawdust, caking the floorboards and streaked the walls like a macabre painting. Silvano's breath rasped as he looked into the mirror. His flexion showed a man in ruin. The right side of his face flayed open, muscled, exposed, with a flap of skin hanging like meat from his jaw. The smile he carved was no smile at all. It was a wound, and the bird that he saw as he peered over his shoulder in the mirror was back, reinserted, perched inside the clock. He hadn't done it, but it was there. And just as they locked eyes, the clock struck 1, and from over his shoulder the bird dropped onto the floor, splashing in the river of blood. It twitched once, then slowly, mechanically, it tilted its carved head upwards to face him. Its beak cracked open with a sickening creak. Cuckoo, it wheezed. Cuckoo. It sang again, a little faster this time. Cuckoo. Its voice was no longer just wood and wind, it was wet. It had breath behind it, saliva, phlegm, the rasp of something with a throat. Then it laughed, a jagged, splintered sound like laughter funneled through rusted gears and shattered glass. Silvano knew the bird was mocking him, mocking everything he'd become. Blood boiling, Silvano let out a scream that tore through the room, wild and feral. He grabbed the hammer from the shelf and hurled it down with all of his might, aiming to crush the mocking bird once and for all. But as he twisted his body, his leg clipped the table, topping over the oil lamp that came trembling down to the floor with him. Glass shattered and oil spread across the blood-slicked floor. The flames hissed around the bird, still their laughing, then died with a soft, sickening fizz as the blood snuffed it out. In an instant, darkness swallowed the room whole, thick, total, and absolute. And in that void, the bird kept singing. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The next morning, the workshop was unrecognizable. Overnight, it became a slaughterhouse of blood and brass. The air stank of burnt oil and tissue, and flies buzzed along the windowsill. When Silvano had come to, his chest was sticky and sore. When he tried to move, a crusted bib of blood cracked and split across his chest, sending pins and needles through his lungs. Through groans, he rolled from the floor, crawled his way onto the work table chair, and that's when he saw them. The diagrams. There were hundreds of them now, pinned to the walls, nailed to the doors. Silvano had drawn many diagrams, but he had no memory of ever drawing these ones. They looked like his work. They were scrawled in his handwriting, but something felt wrong, as if the cuckoo had guided his hand as he slept. He shook away the thought, not wanting to think of that damn bird, and hobbled his way to the sink and splashed cold water over his face. He looked in the mirror, examining his work. The wound across his jaw hurt as bad as it looked. The skin had split further in the night, as if the flesh had continued carving itself. His mouth hung oddly low, off kilter, twisting his smile into a warped crescent. He found a clean rag that wasn't covered in oil and muck and tied it around his head to hold his jaw together. Then he went over to the icebox, taking a chilled bottle of vodka from it and chugged it to numb the pain orbing throughout his body. It was the very bottle he and his mother used to both take a swig from to celebrate their great clock achievements, so it felt appropriate at this moment. Waiting for the vodka to take effect, Silvano headed back to the work table and took to piecing together the phantom drawings of himself, of the machine he was becoming, rendered in copper and ink. And just when he felt the pain dying down to only the one in his heart, he began building again. Silvano began with his hands. He sliced open the fingertips, peeling back the limp flesh like damp paper, revealing the bloody, pulped carcass of his hand. Silvano first dabbed away the blood with some oiled cotton. Then, with sandpaper, he began sanding down his knuckles until they were smooth and pale as ivory. Then, one by one, he skewered copper rods through the meat of his fingers and screwed tiny gears where his knuckles used to be. Silvano took another swig of vodka, letting it burn his mouth, and picked up the old drill, the one he'd used for years to piece together delicate brass, and squeezed it once to test. Then he buried it deep into his wrist, burrowing through bone, and embedded a winding key into the spongy cavern. It stuck from his palm like a grotesque thumb, turning with every flex of his wrist. Silvano felt himself begin to sway. Between the blood loss and the vodka, it was a miracle he had lasted this long. He slumped forward, resting his head against the table, slick with blood and bone shavings, the remnants of what he used to be. He exhaled slowly, and just as his eyes began to close, it spoke, but not from the cuckoo clock. This time the voice came from the walls, from the gears, from the black, unseen seams between reality and madness. Still warm, it hissed. Still meat. Do you think she'd recognize you like this? Silvano didn't answer because he already knew the response. This was how it was always going to be. So, with all of the leftover strength that he had, he pushed away from the work table, picking up the hacksaw, brass plate, and marker, and sauntered over to the mirror, sat down in front of it, positioned the hacksaw over his chest, and with a deep breath, he let the blade tear through his flesh down into his sternum. He howled, breathless, choking on blood that caked his teeth as he cracked himself, sawing back and forth until he had opened himself like a cabinet. He then drove screws into bone, bolted the brass plate to his ribs, and etched numbers across the surface. To finish it all off, he stitched himself shut with wire, then took a moment to steady himself. But the voice returned. "You're close," it said sweetly, "but not done." Exhausted, Silvano slumped back, his breath coming in heavy, wheezing gusts as he stared at the mutilated carcass of metal and bone he'd become. He didn't know how long he'd been working, 4 hours, maybe more, but time now had lost all meaning. He glanced at the mirror, at the abomination reflecting back, and exhaled a broken question. "Isn't it enough for you today?" "No," the voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere. At that moment, his right eye began to twitch. Like his mother, Silvano's right eye always had been the weaker of the two, sensitive to light and prone to blurring when he was tired. Now, under the weight of what he had done to himself, it began to fail entirely. It blinked out of sync with the other, stuttered, then stopped, glazing over like the eye of a corpse. And soon, as the twitching increased, he knew what he had to do. Despite his weakness, it had to be done. His fingers now wrapped in blood, wire, and steel, he reached into the socket and plucked the dying eye from its socket. It came free like a marble, slippery and gelatinous. Back at the table, Silvano took a small regulator pinion, something he had used to repair delicate watches, and pressed it deep into the hollow socket. Then, carefully, almost lovingly, he placed a miniature clock face over it, affixing it with a copper ring. When he looked into the mirror again, his eye was ticking. And with that rhythm, Silvano could see the world differently. He could see time stutter, could glimpse the fractures between seconds, and, just briefly, he swore he saw her, his mother, in the spaces between ticks. In something in the silence between ticks, he swore he heard her voice. On the 7th night, the bird spoke again. Silvano sat before the clock, hands pressed together in prayer, eyes raw and body hollowed from all he had done. The cuckoo door creaked open, and from the dark came her voice. "You've come so far, Silvano. Look at what you've made." He wept. Oh, he wept. The grief didn't fall out of him. It tore, violent and deep. "I'm sorry, Mama," he sobbed. "I don't think I can do any more. I'm tired. I've done everything. I don't have anything left to give." There was a pause. Then the voice shifted. "Don't lie to me, Silvano." Silvano stiffened, lifting his head. "No," he whispered. "I'm not. I can't." Laughter slithered out of the gears, high and jagged, bubbling with vile. "You were always a disappointment, Silvano." He shook his head, covering his ears. "No, I know what you're doing. You're not her. You're not—" "If you stop now," the voice hissed, "I'll kill her. Whatever's left of her. You'll never hear from her again." "You're lying," he said, his voice rising with fury. "That's all you've been doing to me this entire time, is lying to me. I'm your mother now, Silvano." "You're lying!" Silvano screamed, a scream that wasn't anger or grief, but both fused into something feral. With an iron grip, he ripped the bird from the clock. The bird twisted and wriggled in his hands, now wet and warm, feathers sloughing off like rotten skin. "Don't!" it gasped, its voice flickering beneath the beast. "You need me. I'm all you have left." Silvano stared down at the thing in his hands. His breath came ragged, eyes swimming with tears. Then he whispered, "No. You took her from me." And with that, he crushed it. Feathers, bone, gear, blood. It all burst between his palms with a wet crunch. He threw the bird to the floor in a thick mush of feathers and blood and watched it twitch and jerk until it gave in. The shop fell, deafeningly silent. Then the ticking returned. But it wasn't coming from the clocks. It was coming from him. He felt it in his ribs, in his wrist, behind his eyes, a steady rhythm, mechanical and sure. And in that moment, Silvano knew. It was finished. With the bird gone, there was nothing left to keep him from her, nothing left in the way. This was what it was always meant to be. And in the quiet, with the gears softly turning inside him, Silvano Moretti, for the first time in months, actually smiled. Silvano walked to the birdless clock, opened the back of it, and began the final work. The space was already hollowed. He'd been chiseling at it for weeks without memory, deepening the cavity, lining the walls with patterning, rigging the bird's mechanism to a separate lever he could control from inside. He'd even made a perch, and it creaked when he tested it with his hands. Good. he thought to himself. Then he arranged the straps, ropes, and anchoring pins that would be used to hold him in place inside the clock. Then he turned off the lights to the workshop. Silvano stood there in the dark, stripping himself down to the waist. His body was pale and scarred, etched with burns and pus-filled lesions that refused to heal or starting to rot. Silvano took one last breath and climbed inside the clock. The knock came at 9 a.m. the next morning. Outside, the sign "Closed for repairs" still hung in the window. The glass behind it streaked with something brown, not quite blood, not quite oil, but something in between. Vittorio, an old customer, a tailor from across the square, held his broken carriage clock like an offering. He'd been returning to the shop day after day, hoping that Silvano would finally be done with the repairs, but for over a week now the sign had been up. But now Vittorio didn't care. He was desperate and needed it to be fixed. He knocked again, and again he was met with only silence. So then he decided to jiggle the doorknob till it gave way, opening for him. The bell above the door rattled when he entered, but it didn't jingle. It groaned, sounding rusty and wounded. Inside, the air was thick, stagnant, and sour, which turned Vittorio's stomach. Every clock ticked, but none in rhythm. Tock, tick, 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 tick. Then there was a cough. "Silvano?" Vittorio's voice cracked as this all made him anxious, but again to his disappointment, there was no answer. He cautiously wandered around the shop, taking in the state of disarray that befell him. He'd never seen it in such a state, and he knew that poor Signora Maria, may God bless her soul, was rolling in her grave. Vittorio stepped behind the counter towards the workshop, knowing that that's where Silvano spent most of his time. He pulled back the velvet curtain, and what he saw would follow him till the end of his life. Maria's cuckoo clock, the one he'd helped Maria bring into this very room when she'd acquired it, was no longer snug in its alcove, tucked away from time. It was shattered in the corner, covered in blood and glass. But what stood beside it was a clock he'd never seen before. It stood tall and throned atop a pedestal built of splintered wood, human teeth, and vertebrae wound with golden chains. But it was the bird of this clock that drew Vittorio's breath from his chest. Because it wasn't a bird. It was Silvano, or what remained of him. His limbs had been broken to fit the space inside the clock, bones jutted at the wrong angles. His shins had been amputated, replaced with brass springs and sharpened rods. His back creaked with every movement, wound with a pulley system of leather cords strung through his spine like a puppet. But his chest had been hollowed out. His ribs splayed out like insect wings. Inside, a brass chime hung from a spinal hook, swinging with every breath. Flesh had been replaced with panels of glass and iron bolted to meet the sound of ticking pulse within him. But not from any gear, from his heart that was no longer human. And his face. The eyes had been removed, and in their place 2 clock faces, one cracked, the other spinning endlessly. His mouth, carved wider than any man should be, had been stretched and bolted into a permanent O. Inside it rested a small silver bell. Vittorio began to comprehend what he was seeing. Silvano's ribs heaved, then rang, "Cuckoo!" But it wasn't a song, it was a scream, a human scream broken into rhythm. Vittorio stumbled, falling backwards onto the blood-caked floor. Silvano's body jerked forward. It didn't move on its own. The clockwork pulled him in like a mechanism was extracting him inch by creaking inch. His arms extended, elbows bent wrong, skin stapled with wire. From his wrist, a winding key slid out like a tongue. "Help me wind." His voice came in a hissed gurgle, bubbling with blood. "Help me finish and set me free to mother." Vittorio ran and didn't stop. He bolted through the velvet curtain, through the door, tearing off the closed sign in his wake, and into the street. He ran past the neighbors, past the butcher, past the staring faces of confused onlookers. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing in the middle of the cobblestone piazza, screaming for a priest, for police, anyone, and vomited. As Vittorio fled, screaming bloody murder, and before the police could arrive, I made my arrival. Because now he was ready. I slid down from the rafters, approaching Silvano from the side where he couldn't see me. It always pained me when this time came, to see what horrors humanity had committed before it was my time to end it. I always wished that it never had to come to this, that as soon as I knew that they were going to die, I could just end it all there and then before it came to this. But this is a curse I must bear, to see the pain, the suffering, and the cruelty. From here, I could see that his mouth had dried, his lips peeled away to reveal only the cracked bell deep within his gorged raw throat. The light had gone from his eyes, save for the artificial gleam of the glass clock, faces embedded in his skull, spinning in fevered little jerks as though the soul behind him still searched for something just out of reach. Then he saw me, and as he realized who I was, he wept. Not from fear, but from what I could feel, from that humbling warmth in my chest. It was gratitude, because at last, after all the clocks, the bloody bird, the mutilation, the screaming nights, I had finally come for him. "You took your time," he rasped, voice like rusted hinges. "You stole it first," I said, trying to lighten the mood. A smile tried to form along the split curve of his mouth, but failed, halting halfway through and hung there, just twitching, still locked in an O. "I thought," he choked, thick black spit clinging from his chin, "if I became the machine, I could have her back." His clockwork eyes shivered in their sockets, the fractured glass spinning towards the wall where the cuckoo clock sat, dusty, quiet, cracked, just like it always had been since the night he knocked it over. "I heard her in there," he whispered, more to the clock than me. "In the song, in the tick, the bird, it sang like her. The voice," his voice was almost a sob now. "She was in there. I know she was." I turned to the cuckoo clock, taking in its broken body, then turned back to Silvano, ready to break his heart. "It never sang to you, Silvano," I said gently. "You made it sing." He only blinked slowly. "You buried her, and the grief bloomed. It gave feathers, a face, gave it teeth when it wouldn't bring her back." His breath hitched. "I just wanted to see her again." I know. Suddenly, the rhythm inside his chest faltered. I could hear the final gears spinning slower now. "Then end it," he said, not with fear, but with hope. Without saying a word, I came face to face with him. His skin was waxy yellow in the low light. He stunk of cold iron, soured blood, and decay. Still, I couldn't help but see that there was something beautiful about the symmetry of it. How far he'd gone just to make sense of his grief, to build it into something. But there was one part he couldn't reach, the only gear that was left that was slowly descending into its final tick. I placed my hand over the brass plate of his chest, not with force, but with just enough pressure to silence the last dying motion. Before I could continue, Silvano placed a weak, wired hand onto mine. His lifeless casing looked up at me through the cracked glass of his left eye. There was no more horror there, just peace, the kind only the dying ever seem to have. "She'll be there?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, and she won't be afraid of what you've become." He smiled, and for real this time, and closed his eyes. Silvano gasped as my grip closed around his heart, each pulse in my hand weaker than the last, as his life drained into me. Near the end, I reached the part I always hated most, the final remnants. Not because they were difficult, but because they remembered, because they hurt. And just then, as I reached his final remnants, behind him, the old cuckoo clock sounded, but not with a chime, but with a scream. It split the air like sinew tearing through his body with the force of a lifetime unraveling all at once. His soul peeled away, jagged and flailing, raw with regret. The scream held everything, the wife he walked away from, the child he never dared cared for, the quiet horrors stitched into the hands from wartime hospital basements and blood-soaked tents. Things no one would ever believe a man like Silvano Moretti could carry. But I saw it, I felt it, and I took it. 12 chimes rang from the broken bird's clock as his soul surged through me, shuddering, full of teeth and fire, until finally there was nothing left. Silvano slumped in the harness, hollow and still. Steam coiled from his chest and a final exhale drifting like incense into the void. I turned towards the door, raising my hand to make all the clocks around the room tick one last perfect moment of harmony for Silvano to be carried away with. Then I let the room fall silent, except for one, Maria's prized cuckoo clock. Its door opened, but Silvano's small little menace didn't come out. Instead, it was what it had always been, a small, ordinary wooden winged bird with blue painted eyes, perched happily inside its home above its fallen cronies. It chirped once, "Cuckoo." I leaned in close to the little wooden creature, then whispered, "It's not your fault." I could hear it huddle back inside his home as I walked towards the door. Outside, I could already hear sirens, boots hammering against the cobblestones, and voices shouting in panic, but none of them would reach Silvano Moretti in time. Just as the sun finished its rise, I stepped into the light, and I was gone. So, that was the story. I don't know how I'm supposed to end the reading of this tale, so I guess I'll end it with a goodbye. I am going to go to sleep now. Maybe now that I've given it what it wants, I'll hopefully wake up and this will all be over. If that does happen, then it was nice knowing you. If it doesn't, though, then I'll be back. So, goodbye and good night, dear listener, from Death and me, the Curator.